Beshem Hashem na'aseh v'nasliach. We begin Masechet Zevachim, Daf Bet. The theme of the first perek of this Masechet is going to be having proper intention while preparing a korban. There are essentially 4 avodot, 4 acts, services, that have to be done with proper intention in order for a korban to be valid. And the 4 are shechita. Shechita can be done by the kohen or by the owner. And then the next 3 have to be done by a kohen, and that is receiving the blood, taking the blood to the mizbeach, and sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach. So those clearly are 4 things that one must do. And although the Torah is not very explicit about this, but the rabbis are going to make a very big deal out of having proper intention. And we're talking about here in this Mishnah, intention to know what type of korban it is. This is not some kind of a deep understanding of the meaning, symbolism, mysticism, just knowing what kind of korban am I bringing. That seems to be a basic requirement in order for the korban to be effective. Mishnah, Kol Zevachim shenizbechu shelo lishman kesherim, ela shelo alu lebe'alim l'shem chova. חוץ מן הפסח והחטאת, הפסח בזמנו, והחטאת בכל זמן. We're going to see a few different opinions, but this is now Tanakh Kama says. Any korban that was slaughtered, it says slaughtered, but the same would apply to the rest of the 3 activities that the kohen does. If someone slaughters a korban not for its sake, for example, it's supposed to be a korban olah. This animal is designated to be a korban olah. And the kohen slaughters it, having in mind, this is a korban shelamim. So this is wrong. Even though he made this mistake, nevertheless, the korban is kosher, is fit in the sense that you can continue and finish off the service and bring the blood, and you're going to, all the rest of it, since it was designated as a korban, it remains a korban olah, it remains a korban olah. So even though he had the wrong thing in mind, still the animal will be a kosher sacrifice. However, it will not satisfy the obligation of the owner. If the owner made a vow that I am going to bring a korban olah, very good. Now he brings it, and somewhere along the way, he or the kohen has in mind in one of the avodot that it will be a korban shelamim, so he does not fulfill his obligation, he does not fulfill his vow, he's going to have to bring another one. But the korban, we continue to offer it as an olah. However, there are 2 exceptions to this rule. One is korban pesach and korban hatat. If a korban pesach, one has in mind, it's designated as a korban pesach, and pesach, this Pisul, nullification, only occurs on the 14th of Nisan, when we bring Korban Pesach. So if on the 14th of Nisan, someone had a sheep designated as Korban Pesach, and then one does shechita on the sheep, thinking that it's actually going to be a Korban Olah, which it's not, then that Pesach, it's worse than what came before. Not only does it not fulfill the obligation of the owner, it is not even kosher. You cannot continue the service. You have to stop right there, take it outside and burn it outside, and it is totally invalid. And the other exception is a korban chatat, and that would be true all year round. If an animal is designated as a korban chatat because someone has to bring a korban chatat, they'd made a sin by beshogeg, then he brings it. If somewhere along the line someone does one of the 4 activities, thinking that this hatat is going to be something else, a shelamim, then the hatat is no good, and you have to stop it right there. You cannot continue to sacrifice it. So Pesach and Chatat are more stringent than every other korban. That is opinion number 1 of Tanakh Kama. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Af ha'asham, ha'pesach bizmano, v'chatat v'asham bechol zeman. Rabbi Eliezer adds to the 2 a third one, and that's a korban asham. Asham is brought for various types of sins. And if one brings an asham and it's slaughtered, not lishma, then not only does it not fulfill the obligation of the person who's bringing it, also it's invalid. You cannot continue. And regarding all three, Pesach only applies on the 14th of Nisan, whereas chatat and asham, if someone has the wrong intention all year round, it will make it nullified. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, hachatat ba'al chet, ve'asham ba'al chet, ma chatat pesula shelo lishma, af ha'asham pasul shelo lishma. Rabbi Eliezer gives his explanation that chatat offering comes because of a sin, and asham also comes because of a sin, and therefore it makes sense that just like a chatat offering, if you do it shelo lishma, then it's totally invalid. So to an asham will be invalid if it's brought shelo lishma. Third opinion, Yosef ben Honi omer, hanishchatin l'shem Pesach u'l'shem hatat pesulin. Yosef ben Honi makes the rule mutual, that if you had a different korban, anything, a korban olah, and you do shechita, having in mind that it'll be a korban Pesach, and assuming this is on the 14th of Nisan, then that korban olah becomes pasul, and you cannot continue it anymore. And the same thing with the chatat all year round. If you take any animal, whatever it is, it's supposed to be, it's designated as a korban todah, and a person slaughters it having in mind it will be a chatat. Then not only does it not fulfill the obligation of the owner, it's unfit and cannot go on. So this is different from Tanakama. Tanakama only says one way, that if one has a korban Pesach or a korban Hatat, and slaughters it shelo lishma, not for Pesach or not for a chatat, but for something else, then it's pasul. Yosef ben Choni says it works the other way around. So in fact, any animal can become unfit if you have in mind that's going to be either korban Pesach or korban hatat. And the fourth opinion, Shimon Achi Azariah Omer, it's an interesting name because we often have a person who's the son of someone else, but not very often is someone called the brother of someone else. And as she explains that, it's actually, they supported each other. Azariah supported Shimon financially and shared his merit in Torah. So Shimon says, Shehatan l'shem gavoa mehen kesherin, l'shem namuch mehen pesulin. So he says that a pasul will happen if you do shechita on something that is higher than it, then it's okay. Then it's kasher. In other words, if you had a korban shelamim, which is kodashim kalim, and you have in mind that, this is going to be a korban olah, then it's kosher, and you can continue to use it, to sacrifice it. It won't fulfill an obligation, but it's kosher. However, if you make it something lower, it's a korban olah, which is kodshe kodashim, and you treat it now like a shelamim, so you're disgracing it, you're lowering its value, and therefore that becomes unfit. So according to Shimon Achi Azariah, really pisulim can apply to pretty much almost any korban. Well, not the lowest one, because there'd be nothing lower. Anything that you have in mind would be higher, but it would apply to most korbanot. So you see that Yosef ben Honi, since he has the reciprocal rule, that actually could apply to any korban, because any korban that you have in mind, there'll be a chatat, will be pasul. And Shimon Achi Azariah also applies the rule to almost any korban, whereas Rabbi Eliezer says only 3 types, and Tanakama says only 2 types. Kesad. We have some examples to exemplify what Rabbi Shimon would say. Kodshe kodashim sheshechatan l'shem kodashim kalim pesulin. Kodashim kalim sheshechatan l'shem kodshe kodashim kesherin. If you have something that's holy of holies, these are korbanot that, if they can be eaten at all, are only eaten by kohanim and only in the temple courtyard. And if you had in mind that it would be kodashim kalim, which are things, animals that can be eaten or anywhere in Jerusalem, and can be eaten by other people who are, as long as they are tahor. So that's going down a level, then it's pasul. But if it's kodashim kalim, and one has in mind that this is when doing shechita, that it'll be for a type of korban that's kodshe kodashim, then it's kosher. Habechor ve'ama'aseh sheshechatan l'shem shelamim kesherin, shelamim sheshechatan l'shem bechor l'shem ma'aser pesulin. And now we see that even within Kodashim Kalim, there are also sub-levels. And a Bechor animal that's brought as a Korban, and a farmer brings every 10th and treats it like a Korban, if someone had in mind that it will be a Shilamim, that's okay, because a Shilamim is a higher level than Bechor and Ma'aser. But the other way around, if it's in fact a Shilamim, and one did Shechita having in mind that there would be a Bechor or Ma'aser, that's a lower level, even though they're all Kodashim Kalim. The Bechor and Ma'aser are considered lower level, in that is many laws that apply to a Shilamim that don't apply to this. For example, the owner does Semicha for Shilamim, but not for Bechor Ma'aser. There is other libations that accompany the animal for Shilamim, but not for Bechor and Ma'aser. And so for these and other reasons, Shilamim is a higher level than Bechor and Ma'aser. That's the Mishnah. We ask, Lama li limitna ela shelo alu litne velo alu labe'alim l'shem chova. According to Tanakama, he said that although if you have in mind something else, for most korbanot, if it was an olah and you had in mind shilamim, then it's kosher, but it does not satisfy the requirement of the owner. Why does it say the word ela, but it doesn't? Why not just say and it doesn't fulfill the obligation of the owner? Why have this extra word ela, which sounds like there's only one exception, right? I mean, there's two laws. It is kosher, so now you can continue. It does not fulfill the obligation. So there's two things. Ela makes it sound like there's more that it does than that it doesn't. There's only one small exception. So what is it teaching us by treating it in that way? Ha kamashmalan ala be'alim hu de lo alu l'shem chova aval b'kedushatayhu kaimeh v'asur l'shanuye behu. This teaches us that although it does not fulfill an obligation for the owner, but it remains in its level of holiness, and you cannot change anything about it coming up after that. So if it's a korban, if it was designated as a korban olah, and then he did shechita having in mind shilamim, so then he might think, oh, well, since I already thought of it as a shilamim, you know what? I'll continue and treat it like a shilamim the whole time. No, you can't do that, because that's not one of the differences. The only difference is that now it cannot fulfill the obligation of the owner. But in all other ways, it continues the same way. And since it was designated as an olah, you have to continue and treat it like an olah. And you don't say, well, once I make a mistake, forget about it. No, get back on track and treat it the way it's supposed to be. Asur lizrok dama shelo lishma. Rava said, even if someone took an olah and did shechita not for the sake of an olah, still he's not allowed to continue and later on sprinkle the blood, also not lishma. No, he should do it lishma, for whatever the animal was supposed to be in the first place. To back up Rava, we can look to reason, or we can find proof from a pasuk. Could be just based on a logical argument. Just because you deviated in one thing, does that mean you should continue to to change? All right, you made one mistake, but two mistakes don't make one mistake better. Okay, you made one mistake, now get back on track and do the rest properly. So it just makes sense. The pasuk says, whatever comes out of your lips you shall observe to do according to what you have vowed. So you see here that it starts off talking about a neder. A neder regarding an animal is when you say, I am going to bring an animal. You take it upon yourself. And so make sure to fulfill your neder. And then the end of the pasuk says, nedava, calls it a nedava. Hi, nedava. Why does the end of the pasuk say, oh, and there will be a gift offering? A gift offering is a lower level. You just say, I'm going to bring this as a gift, or rather, this animal is a gift. It's a obligation of the hefsa, not of the gavra. So how come you start with a neder, which is gavra, and then you go to nedava, which is only about the animal? And neder who is, you said it was a neder. La'im kema shenadarta asita yeh neder, ve'im ואם לא נדבה יהא. ונדבה משרה לשנויה בה. So here's what the pasuk means. If you fulfilled exactly what you said you would fulfill as a neder, then you fulfilled your neder. And you said, I'm going to take this upon myself. You fulfilled your personal obligation if you did it all correctly. And the Kohen did it all correctly. But if not, if the shechita was done not lishma, then it will be a nedava. In other words, it will be a kosher korban, but it'll be just like any korban that you say, I'm going to bring this as a korban, but it will not fulfill your obligation. Now, even if it's just a nedava, can you change what it's going to be? Even a nedava, that's a focus on the animal, and say, this animal is going to be a shelamim. Okay, you promised a shelamim. Fine. So now it should be treated like a shelamim, even though it's only a nedava. Even though I didn't take a obligation upon myself that I have to bring a shelamim, I only said this will be a nedava. This animal will be a shelamim. Still, you have to treat it like a shelamim, whatever it was. And so therefore, that's the same thing here. Where no matter what the animal is. If it was designated as one thing and one made a mistake, so this pasuk is teaching me that I should continue and not make a second mistake, but rather all the rest of the activities should be lishma according to the original designation. אמר לרבינה לרפפא, להווה את גבן באורתה בתחומה בחרמך, תרמה רבה מילא מעלייתה ההדדה ושנה להו. Ravina tells Rapapa, you missed out last night when because you were outside of the Techum Shabbat. You were outside the limit of Bet Charmach. So, in other words, Rava was in Bet Charmach on Shabbat, and he delivered a shiur on Shabbat. We can get a sense here of the when and the types of things that the sages would teach. They would teach even this kind of high-level shiur with halachic details on Shabbat. And so you see that people would come from as far as they could, but if it's Tchum Shabbat, they cannot come from a different city. So Ravina, who was there, told Rapapa, who was away, you really missed out because Rava brought up contradictions between two sources, and this was a great contradiction. Mile ma'aliyata. He brought superior contradictions. We're going to see one right now, but there's a couple of more that are going to come later. And so he brought these contradictions between Mishnah, amazing contradictions, and he was able to resolve them. We see something about the genius of Rava and the type of Torah that he would teach, that he would bring up a question like that. Two Mishnayot, look how they contradict each other. I'm sure the students would have a lot of difficulty and wonder, it's a good question. And then he would work through it and resolve it. And so he said, you really missed out on this one. What is it? What were these superior contradictions and questions that he brought up and then resolved? Tinan. Kol Zevachim shenizbechu shelo lishman v'chule tamash shelo lishman. Ha-setama alu name la-be'alim l'shem chova. Alma setama name ki-lishman dameh. Number one, Mishnah is our Mishnah that says any korban that was slaughtered shelo lishman. So then it's going to be that it will not fulfill the obligation for the owner, but it's kosher, except for two and so on. So what do we see here? Why is it no good? Why does it not fulfill the obligation for its owner? Because specifically the slaughterer had in mind shelo lishman. He specifically had in mind this is going to be a shelamim, even though it's supposed to be an olah. But what if setama? What if he did not have any specific intention? He wasn't thinking. It was designated as a korban olah. He wasn't thinking it's going to be an olah, but he wasn't thinking that's going to be a shelamim or anything else either. He was just thinking about the baseball game. His mind was somewhere. He wasn't thinking about anything. So in that case, it would fulfill the obligation of the owner, because the Mishnah only says if he has in mind something, a shelamim, a different korban, shelo lishman, then it's no good. But setam, then it's fine. So setam is the same as if he had lishma. Urmin hi kol haget shenichtav shelo leshem isha pasul usetama name pasul. The contradiction is from a Mishnah Masechet Gitin that says any get that's written not for the sake of a particular woman, is not valid. When a man wants to divorce his wife, he has to come to the scribe and he has to tell the scribe, I want you to write a get for, and he has to say, Yaakov and Leah. And this is me, this is my wife, Leah. And the scribe has to have in mind that particular person. If a scribe is having in mind different people, he wrote a get for Yaakov and Leah, a different Yaakov and Leah, and someone else finds it with the same names, they cannot use it, has to be written specifically for this person. Okay, so that's the same language that we have in our Mishnah in Zevachim, is the very same language as we have in Masechet Gitin. Isha is no good. But here's the question. The halacha regarding Gitin is that Stam is also pasul. That let's say the scribe, he didn't have anybody particularly in mind. He's just writing it. He's just writing Yaakov Leah. He's not thinking about anything. He's thinking about the baseball game. He's thinking about a generic person named Leah and no one in particular. It's also not good. When it comes to a get, he has to have in mind positively a person that he is writing it for. So this is a challenge, because regarding Zevachim, we said that if it's setam, it's okay, as long as you didn't have in mind something that's not. If you had just a setam with no specification, it's kosher. But when it comes to a get, if you had no specification, then it's not kosher. So why should that be? The Mishnayot have the same language. And Rava gave an answer, a conceptually very interesting answer. You see, Rava's genius is that he's going to look into the essence of what each law is all about. And even if it has the same words and some of the same structure, but the topic is totally different. And here's the difference. Zevaḥim bistam lishman omdim, isha bistama lav legerushin omedet. When you have a korban that's designated to be a korban, it's consecrated, so then there's a presumption that it is going to be what it is meant to be. This was designated as a korban olah. Therefore, it's going to continue to be a korban olah. It's standing there, ready and waiting to be sacrificed as a korban olah. You already had intention at the time that you designated it. And therefore, as long as it continues its way, without any designation at all, it will remain a korban olah. It's only no good if someone comes and now says, oh, I'm thinking about this as a korban shalimim. That's going to undo the designation. That's bad. But as long as you don't do anything, it will remain in the designation that it had. However, you cannot apply that to a woman. Would we say women are standing for divorce? That everyone who gets married, they're just one step towards getting divorced. They're ready and waiting. Oh, you got married. Congratulations. Okay, when's the divorce going to be? 10 years, 20 years? Sometimes that happens. In a lot of Western countries, more than 50% of marriages end in divorce. But that's not what we're talking about. We're assuming that marriages are going to last a lifetime, and once in a while, okay, divorce happens. But generally, a married woman is designated as a married woman, and the presumption is she will remain that. Now you want to get a divorce, you need specific intention to say, this woman, she's the one that I'm writing that I want to divorce her. So you have to have specific intention in order to designate a woman as someone who will be divorced, because they are not sitting ready and waiting or pre-designated to be divorced, and therefore you need positive lishma to make a get work, and if it's stam, it's no good. Uzvachim bistama kesherin minelan. And now the Gemara asks, so what is the source? We're not looking for a source in a pasuk, but rather a source in the Mishnah to establish that the law is, in fact, as Rava said, that a korban that's slaughtered setam is kasher, meaning it's a valid korban, and it even fulfills the obligation of the owner. As long as you don't have negative intention, that, let's say, it's meant to be a korban olah, and you have intention for it to be a korban shelamim, that's negative intention. That is going to make it invalid. Is going to make it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. Although according to Tanakh, you can still sacrifice this kosher, but it's invalid to fulfill an obligation. That's if you have negative intention. But if you have no intention, we'll call that setam, then it does fulfill according to Rava. What is the source in the Mishnah? Ilema mahaditnan kol zevachim shenizbechu shelo lishman v'chule v'la katane shelo nizbechu lishman. Maybe it's our very Mishnah, as we discussed already, that the language of the Mishnah is any korban that is sacrificed for negative intention, then it's not going to be good. It's not going to fulfill the obligation. So we can infer just from that negative intention is bad, but setam would be good. And look, the Mishnah doesn't say that it was not sacrificed for intention, and that would sound like no intention at setam, and that would be bad. It doesn't say that setam is bad. It only says negative intention is bad, which means setam is okay. So that sounds like a logical proof. However, gabe get name haketane kol haget shenichtav shelo l'shem isha pasul, v'la katane shelo nichtav l'shem isha pasul. If you apply the same methodology to the same language that said regarding get, you would get to the same conclusion, but regarding a get, that conclusion is definitely wrong, because regarding a get, the Mishnah says, any get that's written, not for the sake of a woman. Now, in parallel, that would mean for the sake of a wrong woman. That's negative intention. So it was written to divorce this le'ah, and now you want to use it to divorce a different le'ah. Okay, that's not going to be good. If it just had that, we can infer that if it's stam, let's say the scribe had in mind no specific le'ah, he just wrote le'ah, then that would be good. And after all, the Mishnah does not say that it was not written l'shem isha, and that language would sound like setam is pasul. It doesn't say that. It says negative intention is pasul, so stam would be okay. But when it comes to a get, that's not true. A get has to be written with positive intention for a specific woman, otherwise it's not good. Therefore, this methodology that you just applied to our Mishnah is not a valid methodology, so we need another proof. Ela mehad itnan kesad lishman v'shelo lishman l'shem pesach u'shem shelamim. Let's try to prove it from a Mishnah on Daf Yud Gimel that says a case of someone's doing slaughter and he combines lishma and shelo lishma. What's an example? It's supposed to be a korban pesach. In the beginning of the slaughtering, he says l'shem pesach, but then he says l'shem shelamim somewhere in the middle, halfway through. Then that's no good. What can we infer from here? Tamad amar l'shem pesach l'shem shelamim, ha'l'shem pesach ustama kasher, alma setam kilishman dameh. The reason why it's no good is because he said l'shem pesach, but then he had negative intention by saying l'shem shelamim. But if he said l'shem pesach at the beginning, and then his mind wandered, and he wasn't thinking about pesach anymore, he was just thinking about nothing, it's kosher. So what can you see from here? That setam is the same as lishma. It's just like if he had l'shem korban pesach in mind the whole time, it would be good. If he has pesach and then stam, it's also good. So stam is the same as lishma. Isn't that a good proof? That even if he had stam the whole time, then it would also be good? No, obviously not. There we could say someone who's doing something, he is continuing his intention that he had at the beginning. Since at the beginning has Pesach, so then even though sometimes you start something and you know what you're doing, and then your mind kind of just goes on autopilot, and you start driving, you know where you're going, and then you go on autopilot, and so you still are going to go where you want to go because you had intention at the beginning. So we assume that he's continuing is the same intention, but the beginning is the most important. Like in the Amidah, you have to have intention in the first beracha, and then hopefully, the intention will continue. So maybe it's only in this case, it's okay to have stam after you had proper intention. Then that's okay. But if you had no intention the whole time from the beginning, maybe it would not be good. So that's not a good proof. The continuation of the Mishnah gives the opposite case. If you started off shelo lishma and then went to lishma, it's in fact a korban pesach. You started slaughtering it having in mind shelamim, and then you corrected yourself and said, "Oh, it's l'shem pesach." Then it's also not good. Ta'amad amad l'shem shelamim l'shem pesach. Haset tamad l'shem pesach kasher. We can infer that the reason why it's no good is because first you said shelamim and then you said pesach. But if you started with stam and then said pesach, it would be okay. So that means setam is the same as having proper intention. And if that's true for the first half, maybe that's true if they had stam, intention the entire time. No, that's not a good proof either. There's two reasons why it's not a good proof. Number one, there we could say maybe it's what he had in mind at the end will prove what he had in mind in the beginning. At the beginning, he sees stam. We don't know what he's doing. He's not thinking about it. But since and eventually he says l'shem Pesach, then from there we can infer, he must have meant that implicitly even from the beginning. But if you said nothing at all the whole time, then it would not be good. So we can't prove anything from here. Or another reason why this is not a good proof, iname, the reason why it uses this example of shelo lishman and then lishman is only because it's continuing the same style as the Resha that said lishman v'shelo lishman. That's why I picked this example. But it doesn't mean that you can infer that stam, it would be the same. It would be different. You don't say, since this is a shelo lishman v'lishman, that's no good, then stam and lishman is good. Maybe not. Maybe you just use this example because it's continuing the examples from before but switching only one thing. But maybe just like shelo lishman and lishman is no good, also setam and lishman is also not good. And so we cannot even prove that setam and lishman would be good. Maybe even that case by itself would be no good. And certainly setam the whole time would not be kosher. So that's not a good proof either. Ela final proof from a Mishnah later on 46b that says some very important principle. L'shem isha devarim hazevach nizbach. A korban has to be offered with intention of 6 different matters. Number 1, l'shem zevach. That's what we've been talking about. You have to have in mind the type of korban that is going to be. Korban pesach, korban shelamim, korban todah. L'shem zoveach. Who is the owner? Who bought this korban? You have to have in mind that it's for him and not for somebody else. L'shem Shem has to be l'shem shamayim, for Hashem and not for some idol or any other power or anything else. L'shem Ishim has to be for the sake of being consumed on the fire of the Mizbeach. It's not that you're just going to singe it a little on the fire, but rather you have to burn it completely on the Mizbeach. L'shem Reach, Rashi learns from here that you also have to start the cooking of the parts that go on the Mizbeach. You can't start cooking it on your own barbecue and then just finish it on the korban because it has to have smell. And most of the smell is going to be right at the beginning, right when you put the steak on the grill. That's when you have a lot of smoke and it makes a lot of smell. And so we learn from these two that the beginning of the cooking has to be on the Mizbeach and has to be completely cooked on the Mizbeach, any parts that go on the Mizbeach. Rambam learns from here something different, that it has to be for the sake of the smell and not for eating. In the ancient Near East, people used to think that the gods actually eat the korbanot, and you can't have that in mind, that Hashem thinks, you could possibly think that Hashem is going to eat the korban, but rather it's just a smell. The smell is not a tangible thing, and so you could have that in mind, but only reach. L'shem nichoach, it should be pleasing to Hashem. You shouldn't bring it in an angry attitude, but with an attitude that I hope, with my humility, that this will be pleasing to Hashem. V'achatat v'hasham l'shem chait. If it's in a chatat or a sham, then you have to have in mind also the sin that for which you are atoning. Okay, so now that's the beginning of the Mishnah. Mishnah continues and says, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Af mishelo haya belibo l'shem achat mikol elu kasher. Rabbi Yosef says, even if someone who did the slaughter did not specifically have one of these things in mind, it's still kosher. Why? Shetanai bet din hu, because it's a condition of the court. The court says everybody has to have this in mind. So as long as you don't have negative intention, if you just skipped this one, we assume that you had it in mind. This is true also for some documents like a ketubah. If the bet din says you have to put in the ketubah these 3 things, A, B, C, D, even if you leave out B, the bet din says the husband is still obligated to pay for that because it's implied that the bet din requires it, and therefore it's assumed that it will be responsible. Same thing here. Even if someone doesn't have intention, we assume it. Now the bet din goes further and says, Atnu bet din de la lema lishmo. Dilma telememar shelo lishmo. The bet din made a stipulation that actually the one doing the slaughtering should not say that this is l'shem, a type of korban, because he may come to make a mistake. You're doing a lot of korbanot during the day, and this is shelamim, whenever, and then you might make a mistake and call a korban olah. You might say l'shem shelamim, and then you'll have a problem. And so therefore, better not to say anything at all. This is like when you meet someone and you're like 90% sure of their name, better not to say their name, because the 10% that you're going to get it wrong is so embarrassing. That's much worse than the possibility that you will get it right. And therefore, better to just say, hi, how are you? And don't say their name. So something similar to that. Here, the Beit Din says, don't say anything, any L'Shem. That way, you won't come to make a mistake and ruin it. Now, if you think that a setam is no good, that it's not kosher, or it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner, then would the Beit Din come and make a condition that would make the offering unfit and not fulfill the obligation of the owner? Obviously, the Beit Din is not going to make a stipulation that's actually going to make things worse. So we can infer from here that that setam, if someone has, as long as they don't have negative intention, saying it's for the wrong type of korban, as long as they don't say anything at all, just setam, then the korban is not only valid and kosher, but it even fulfills the obligation for the owner. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.